Hey, Jono, do you think we're missing intro music?
Hell yeah, dude. Let's get some intro music up in here.
Yeah, let's do it. Go!
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. I am your host, Jonathan, and I'm joined by my co-host, Evan.
Hey, I'm Evan. Guys, you better put on your psychological thinking caps. We're going to do Sigmund Freud proud today by talking about...
Pavlovian conditioning and other operant conditioning.
Yeah, just conditioning in general. But, you know, they're psychological related things, which I will say we are very qualified to speak on.
Who's Sigmund Freud?
He's like the forefather of psychiatry and study of the human mind.
Okay, I thought it was someone completely different, but we'll just...
Well, who did you think it was?
Like, do you know the dude that makes music? Like Mozart, it's like one of those dudes. It just sounds like the type of name.
That's funny.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Okay, we're going. We've already gotten off track. Okay, so let's get straight to it. So pretty much, we're going to talk about Pavlovian conditioning and operant conditioning, which are two psychological effects, and it's essentially a behavior that we have. So for Pavlovian conditioning, it's essentially when you induce a response through repetitive exposure to a stimulus. This comes from Ivan Pavlov's experiments with his dogs, the Pavlov's dogs, if you may have heard of them. This is not to be confused with Igor Pavlov, the founder of 7-Zip.
It's very similar names, though.
So pretty much Ivan did these experiments with his dogs in which he would give them food or there'll be a bell rung beforehand. So eventually the dogs were conditioned to respond to the bell ringing.
Exactly. And so it pretty much made it so every time he would ring the bell, he would give them food. And then in the future, if he were to ring the bell and not give them food, they would still like salivate and be expecting the treat, right? So
Yeah.
They've been conditioned when they hear that bell to want food.
Which is in itself is like, it's pretty crazy. And I think it's something that I guess now you could, if you really thought long and hard about something like this, you could probably be like, hey, it's crazy that when I'm doing this, like say for example, if you see food and you smell food and you salivate when you see or smell food, but then if the food's not there and you just smell it and you start to like salivate, you're like, oh man.
Even like visual stimulus, if you just see food on the TV or something, you're saying, oh man, that looks good. That's part of it. That's kind of why as well I can't watch cooking shows because you don't get to eat it or smell it or anything.
You're just watching them make it. You're sitting there like a sucker.
Torturous.
Actually, one thing with this is that we all mentioned food, but the idea is that it's tied to a biologically exciting stimulus. So like something like food or anything that you innately want.
Yeah, exactly. But that said, it doesn't always have to relate to something that is good. And a good example of this is from the book A Clockwork Orange, and probably known from the Stanley Kubrick movie. They use something called the Ludovico technique. And I'm sure this is something that a lot of people have seen parodied in other like pieces of media as well, where it's somebody who's hooked up to a machine that like holds their eyes open and they're forced to watch all these graphic sort of videos and things. And what happens in the book is he's fed something that makes him really nauseous. And so he's forced to watch these things. And this conditions him in the future to not be violent because he's watched all these violent things. And now he associates it with that feeling of nausea. And so it can be used in like a negative connotation as well.
And yeah, it's not so, I guess in that way it's like no, I don't want to say weaponized, but it's used with like direct.
Well, obviously that's a really extreme example of it.
But it's something that it happens naturally. Like it just happens in multiple ways throughout like your lifetime. Like whether or not it's intentional or not, it's just something that we can't avoid. It's natural. In saying that, there are situations where this reaction is not ideal. So for example, when if you want to take drugs or partake in certain addictive behaviors, you can end up conditioning yourself to feel and experience the sensations of having the drug, even if you're in the same location, wearing the same clothes, with the same people, or anything that sort of ties you to that behavior you partook in if it was repetitive and consistent. For an example, a lot of people, when they go to a location they used to smoke at, after a work smoke break location, they'll get their cravings and their withdrawal symptoms like skyrocket, because their brain is, when they go there, their brain's like, you always smoke when you go here, you have to smoke now. And so it's really difficult for people trying to recover from addiction to break away if they're in the same routine, the same lifestyle that they were previously in. And yeah, it's like, it all happens with everything, even with alcohol. It's like, it's a thing that it happens in social events when people, if they drink in certain social situations, that they'll feel the same way and have those withdrawal symptoms come about again. And that can be detrimental, right? It can ruin your like recovery. If you're recovering from addiction, it's a dangerous thing.
Yeah, for sure. And this is like distinct from it being the actual chemical addiction that these people have. It's sort of just a trigger that sort of feeds back into memories of that. So it's not directly the addiction.
Yeah, that's Pavlovian conditioning. It's a lot more detail to it than what we could ever go into.
I think we gave pretty extreme examples, but we're talking about like our own personal experiences a little bit after, but I'm sure these sorts of things, they are pretty ubiquitous in our own lives, and there would be like a lot of manifestations of them, even if they're really small, that you'd never think about. It's sort of just something you take for granted and like is something you interact with on every day. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and for the most part, it can be just a conditioning that like once it's gone, maybe it does nothing. You're just like, oh, I'm expecting this or that or whatever. You might notice it or you might not notice it. Evan, would you like to tell us about operant conditioning?
Yes. So on the converse to Pavlovian conditioning, operant conditioning is instead of Pavlovian conditioning where the stimulus comes before, right? So like you hear the bell ring and then you want to do something. So operant conditioning is where the stimulus comes after. So what that means is it could relate to something as it could be like either positive or negative reinforcement of a certain behavior. So like either, being rewarded with something or being punished. The main theory of this came from a guy called Skinner, and he made something called the Skinner box. And what this was a box that they could test with like a rodent, like a rat or something. They would train them to pull a lever inside this box and it would reward them with food, right? So they would do something and they would be rewarded positively. And so then in the future, they would like behave, they would know like if they pull the lever, they get food, right?
It wasn't technically that they trained the rat per se, but it's more that the rat would eventually figure out on its own. So it's more like they just let it kind of learn and realize that if you pull the lever, you get food. And then the Skinner box kind of just enables any researcher to kind of have the ability to figure out like, oh, so if we want the rat or we want the subject to do this, reward them if they do it right. But then also if they miss it or they don't do it correctly, then punish them.
Well, sort of, yeah. Well, the idea of it is it's an enclosed box that you can easily see these effects from. So that's sort of like where it's come from, but it applies to humans as well. And this probably crops up in a lot of places in real life as well. So one main part of it is, I would say, it gets used for like malicious intent quite a bit in things like a lot of the media that you would look at. So Netflix or YouTube, for example, they have a specific algorithm that's designed to continue to recommend you more shows based on what you've watched, right? So it wants to keep like the point of these platforms is they want to keep you on there and keep you watching things. So it sort of just gets into a loop of you're there and like you watch a show, and so it'll like sort of reinforce that behavior by recommending you more shows and like getting you to stay there. And this is done in games a lot as well. They just have gameplay loops that are like, you do this and you get XP and that's good. So like you get to progress in the game, and so you want to keep doing that and it keeps going.
It's also like one thing as well is that most people experience this kind of effect in a more like kind of standard way from just like being raised. When your parents tell you, oh, do this, and you don't do it, and then they either reprimand you or whatever. It's like just in that kind of relationship that's in self, it will lend itself to kind of operant conditioning.
Or it could be like through experience. Like if you touch a stovetop and it's hot, you get burned, right? And it hurts. So you'll know in the future not to touch a stovetop.
So it's very much like it's ingrained in like how we learn things. And it's a very important like kind of conditioning behavior, but also to the end, like Evan was mentioning, that it has and does get used in a way in kind of the marketing material that we're exposed to and the things that we see in the internet in the modern day. And I think that if we haven't already scratched the surface, we're like digging like as like a collective society of knowledge with digging way deep into the potential that utilizing effects and like human aspects like these can give for like getting people to do things.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely in marketing things as well. I guess that relates to what I was talking about with like video recommendation services, but it could probably be used pretty easily for like political campaigns or whatever, just to provide targeted advertising to people based on what they do. So this also feeds into like addiction, like we were talking about before. So obviously this would kind of be like the main part of an addiction, right? Because you it doesn't have to apply to something negative. It could be just eating food, even as like a really innocent example. Like you eat food and it like tastes nice, right? It has like sugar in it and things, and so you get reinforced that it's like it's good to eat food. But obviously that's not always the case. You can overeat. With that said, it doesn't really always have to be used with malicious intent. It's sort of just something that our brains do on a regular basis. For example, like if you're learning to play an instrument, you like have a series of notes that you want to play, right? And if you play them wrong, it sounds awful. And so you'll sort of like negatively connotate that with, you know, it's wrong. And so you like reinforce yourself to play it right. And sort of that can be applied to anything like learning, going through any learning process, you learn from your mistakes and you get better, right?
And actually, I think another aspect to consider is it comes down to the person on the level of that, how quickly they learn from these kind of behaviors, right? So if you are learning an instrument, like not to kind of lump them in a group, I guess like hard workers would be able to put more time into something and like really, I guess if they're like considering it in the right way, like reflecting on like what they do and stuff, and be able to like learn more from each like negative or positive like reaction, right? Or like reinforcement. And so I guess it kind of like it's interesting to think about the rate at which people learn, even when they're given the same kind of stimulus. Like if two people are reprimanded in the same way, and who actually picks it up and goes further more. And
yeah, for sure. No, I know what you mean. That's actually a really good point. It's sort of like an indicator of intellect, even, I'd say, because if you are able to, like, every time you do something wrong, you're able to implement a change immediately to try and fix that problem, I think you're going to be a lot better off than somebody who just does the same thing over and over again and expects different results.
Natural selection at work is like, if you burnt your hand on the stove, and it's like, do you do it again and die, or do you just avoid the danger of the hot thing?
Very dramatic.
that was fairly dramatic. I was actually gonna even ask me like if a lion rips your arm off, again let it rip off the other arm. But
yeah,
I have no experience with lions nor my arms being ripped off, so I didn't want to kind of open that can of worms. But one, I guess going being through uni and all that, you see a wide variety of people who take on their education at varying levels, and some people who are like are yearning and absolutely will do anything for that little bit of that feedback and that motivation. It's just that reinforcement of telling them if they're doing something right or wrong. And there's some people who just completely just are self-motivated, and they'll sort of just do things in their own little routine.
Oh, so you're saying like the difference between the stimulus coming either from yourself telling you that it's wrong, or the stimulus coming from like you asking somebody else if what you did is wrong? Yeah,
I don't know if that's like perfectly pertinent to these like psychological effects, but I guess like in a way they are. But it's just kind of like what's the best reinforcement, or like what's the best for Pavlovian conditioning. I guess it's not really as is relevant, because it's more just about the repetition of that stimulus. But in like operant conditioning, it's about that reinforcement and its meaning to you, I guess. So like considering like what that means to you, like if someone told you did a bad job, like would you care as much if it came from like your friend or your teacher, or versus like some random on the street? Like do you know what I mean?
Well, yeah, I know what you mean. That sort of takes into other factors, like what your opinion of the person telling you what you've done, or like whether it's good or bad is, because, you know, if you regard their opinion highly, obviously it's going to have more of an impact on you. Whereas I feel like if you yourself are telling you that you've done something wrong or right, you truly believe that.
Yeah, exactly. So and maybe this is a little bit of a tangent. It's thinking about how this kind of like it plays out in your life, I guess, and like obviously like we mentioned before in the dozens of examples that it's you've been conditioned one way or the other through various things, whether it's for the better or for the worse of you as a person, such as learning an instrument or being exposed to certain ads and deciding to buy a product. What best influences us, and what are the ways that most motivate us to do better? Is that getting a bit too? I don't know.
No, I think it's pretty relevant, yeah, because it's interesting seeing, because some people are obviously a lot more self-motivated than others, right? Not trying to call anybody out, but it would sort of be due to this stuff like having inherently been drilled into you. I don't know if it's whether like in your upbringing, whether you're used to, having to do stuff for yourself or getting help from others and being coddled, it would shape the way you do things in the future.
Wait, I've just thought of something. All right, so what if you condition someone to be more easily conditionable, and so it's like recursively feeds back on itself, and you just make them so like susceptible to conditioning that you instantly can like make them do whatever you want.
You have that's called brainwashing, I'm fairly certain.
All right, I've invented brainwashing. All right, I'm going commercial.
Just mind control or something. I know, but do you think you can condition yourself to be more conditionable?
I mean, I guess you. It kind of actually sounds like truth serum when I think about it. Like, to be more susceptible for people telling you what to do or whatever. It's just.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be other people telling you what to do. It could just be for yourself. Like, do you think you yourself can take steps to make yourself be able to learn things better? Just be more mindful of like going through a process, trying to like really make a structured way of doing it. Is like, if I do something wrong, make a drastic change. Based on the drastic change, maybe fine tune it and see.
Yeah.
I feel like it's sort of just like your own self telling you how to learn better.
Oh no, it's a self-reflective process, and I think it comes down to you as a person deciding, hey, like this is what happened, this is what we're in. It's like what every professional any sort of sport or game or activity does. Like when you're trying to be the best at something, you spend that time, you sit down, you look at yourself and you think, what did I do wrong? How do I do better? And all the little things, and you're just refining that and honing that like relentlessly nonstop. And I think in itself, that's quite an arduous process that not many people can do. And I guess it's because it's hard. It's hard to train. And like I said before, it's hard to beat your brain at its own game. You know what I mean? Like it's your brain will work in a certain way, and there's only so many things you can do to kind of beat its like inherent like wiring.
Yeah, for sure. I know what you mean, because like if this stuff in general is hard, kind of your brain is adverse to it and it doesn't want to do it. But if you're telling it has to, and like you overcome it, it's sort of going against what you would instinctively think. So I don't know. Doesn't that mean that you're going against your conditioning? Yeah,
well, it's like, I guess you can end up like training your mind to do whatever. Well, not
you're training your mind to go against. You're conditioning it to go against its own conditioning.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we're taking this on a whole like different, like irrelevant, like incorrect tangent. But I think it's just like thinking about it from like what we know. I think it's there's possibilities here. I can invent mind control. Sure. I mean, we got the electrical engineer gonna make a little bit. What are they called? Those things, those caps where they put the electrodes in them and they zap people. Is that a thing?
I know what you mean. I don't know the name for it. Sorry, they didn't go over that in my degree, sadly.
All right,
I must have missed that course.
I'm going to call them the electrical swim caps. So
okay.
Gonna mass produce a bunch of electrical swim caps. Have a tryout, like get a free electrical swim cap, zap everyone, boom, conditioned. That's exactly how it works.
Yes. Speaking of extremely realistic applications of these in our real lives, can you think of any places that either of these conditionings have like manifested themselves in your day to day?
Oh, like I think I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, right? Like the when you salivate, when you see food, or when you think of food or whatever. And like I don't know if it's exactly the case, but when it's late at night, I used to really love to just like I needed to go to like hit the gym. I had to hit the gym late. I couldn't do it during the day. I would not feel like I'd be so not in the mood to move about, but it hits like 11, 12, 2 a.m. Not that those are the best times to go, but my I was just itching. I was antsy, and like I think it's literally because every single time I just come home and sit in that like location where I'm just sitting there watching movies, it's like I'd always get up, get my gear on and go at the same time every day, 5 days a week. Or every weekday, 5 days a week. So I guess like I think that counts as...
I'd say that falls in the Pavlovian camp, yeah, but I don't know if it's the healthiest thing. You like when you come home and you're tired from work and then all of a sudden you get all this adrenaline like, oh man, I gotta go and do exercise.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. I was gonna say like defend it. I'm like, oh no, it's not. It's not. And that's what I was saying before. It's like it's kind of just a human aspect that we can't necessarily control whether it does good or bad in our lives. But I think, like we mentioned, there's a lot of things that we talk about. Just being aware of them, I think, gives a great power to you that you're able to realize that this is what's happening and this is why you feel a certain way sometimes.
Hold that thought, Jono. A word from our sponsor.
Finance is scary.
What is money?
Why do we need it?
Is my business going to fail?
Am I a failure?
If you ask yourself these questions every waking minute of your life, we can help. Got stocks?
Buy high, sell low.
Struggling to make ends meet?
Taxes are for chumps.
Looking to make your next investment?
Invest in Bitcoin.
And if you're looking to liquidate your assets,
We'll hydrate
you. Call Roop
and Ekorb, financial consultants today.
So anyways, I have like one rather extreme example. I think it also falls in the Pavlovian camp, but you can be the judge of that. The alarm that I use on my phone, obviously you don't really associate that with very positive things because, you know, it means you got to get up and go out into the cold world. And so one time I'm in public and I hear that somebody's phone alarm goes off and it's the same alarm that I use. And it's just like a shiver runs down my spine. And all of a sudden, you know, you're going into fight or flight territory and it's just the worst feeling ever.
Yeah, I've had that too. That's crazy.
Exactly. So I'd say like you've been conditioned to really hate that sound. And I know people as well who've set their like wake up alarms to a song that they liked. Little did they know, now they hate it. I wonder why.
Yeah, it's just absolutely just tying it to the worst like part of like most people's day.
Exactly. I think that's the fastest way to ruin something for yourself. But some people use like these wake up lights, so it's just like a light that slowly like fades in and it's supposed to wake you up from like, you know, there being a light source next to you.
Yeah.
I hope that wouldn't ruin light for you because I like being in the sun.
Well, actually, I don't know if it's like what the research behind this is, but I noticed that at least on like newer phones, the alarms like they fade in. They don't just go like instantly.
Oh, really? Okay.
They I think I don't know how to describe it musically, but they're not sharp notes. They're very it's like tuned.
So yeah, you're saying it's like gentle and smooth.
Yeah, so it's like
I kind of feel like that wouldn't really make a difference because there's always going to be, I feel like you're always jolted awake. You go from being not asleep to being fully awake, right? There's like a distinct point where you become awake.
I mean, if we're going to talk about sleep and go into that path, it's like there's heaps of levels of sleep. It's like, and I think we could even do a whole episode on sleep, but it's this, from what I've vaguely remember, it's this, you can be in like a deep sleep and there's like, as you kind of hear stimulus outside, where you like slowly get more and more awake. So it's like when you have that shock, like someone like claps and like shakes you awake, that's when you jump into action. You get an adrenaline rush and you're just ready to like charge whoever it is. But then if it's like slowly and lulls you up, then it's like the most kind of quote unquote natural because it's like getting you slow, like not jarring. It's not very jarring. It's not like pushing you out of all those levels of sleep.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, I think that's all we had to talk about today. Evan, would you like to wrap up?
Yeah, for sure. So hopefully from this you can, you know, figure out why every time you walk into your bathroom you taste toothpaste, I guess. I don't know.
I hope people aren't doing that. Like, do you do that?
Well, I don't know. Well, like you get the smell. I don't know. Do you think like you can get associative smells? Like you walk in a place and you expect the smell?
But I haven't. You imagine? Yeah. I haven't conditioned myself to. Continue.
This has been a little derivative. I hope you've derived a little enjoyment from this podcast. I've been Evan.
And I've been Jono. Bye.